All right. So we're diving deep today into the early days of like a huge global phenomenon, Elvis Presley, right? We're
Okay.
going all the way back to his childhood in Tupelo and then in Memphis, those really formative years. And his very first love, Dixie Lock. And then those first like rumbles of what would become his revolutionary music career.
Yeah.
And we've got like a really interesting spread of sources here. We've got a recent Reddit post about Dixie Lock's passing. There's a review of her book where she shares her story. And of course, Wikipedia's like super detailed account of Elvis's early life.
Right.
There's also a Daily Express article that offers Dixie's point of view, then a pretty in-depth music review by this guy, Joel Francis, and then some interesting excerpts from Elvis, the musical, licensed by Broadway Licensing.
Yeah, I think like when you look at someone who becomes like this cultural icon like Elvis, did you know it's so important to understand those like really early building blocks? What were those raw materials that kind of made him him? What were the interactions and experiences that like set him on that path?
Totally.
I think that's like at the heart of what we're going to dig into today.
Totally. And you know what really kicked off this whole deep dive was that Reddit post we saw. It's dated April 2025, and it mentions the passing of Dixie Lock.
Right.
She was Elvis's first girlfriend. And it really brings her back into focus. It's like this reminder of that really intimate window she gave us into his life, before the screaming fans and global fame.
It's such a powerful thing to remember that even the biggest stars have these really human beginnings,
Yeah,
and those early connections can be so formative.
totally.
And, Dixie's book that came out in 2021, it gives us this amazing firsthand account of that time.
Absolutely. So let's rewind right back to the very beginning.
Okay.
Elvis Aaron Presley, born in Tupelo, Mississippi, January 1935. And then when he was 13, the family moved to Memphis, Tennessee, a city that, as we all know, becomes like completely linked with his musical destiny.
Right.
But those early years in Tupelo weren't exactly a walk in the park, were they?
No, not at all. I mean, Wikipedia paints this picture of real financial instability.
Yeah.
His dad, Vernon, he had all these different odd jobs, never really settled into a career, and the family often had to rely on help from others.
Yeah.
And then in 1938, they hit a real rough patch. They lost their home.
Wow.
And Vernon was actually jailed for 8 months for altering a check.
Oh, wow.
That kind of early insecurity must have some impact.
For sure, for sure. And then in first grade, Elvis was like a totally average student. But even then, those first little hints of what he would become were starting to show. Like at 10 years old, he had his very first public performance ever.
Oh, wow.
At the Mississippi Alabama Fair and Dairy Show, he sang Old Shep, and get this, he came in 5th place.
Really?
I know.
5th place, huh?
5th place.
You know what's really interesting is just a few months later, he gets his first guitar for his birthday.
Oh, wow.
And here's the thing. He actually wanted a bicycle or a rifle.
Really?
It makes you wonder about like those initial interests, and how that musical path really grabbed hold of him.
Oh, sure.
He did learn some basics, from his uncles and a pastor, but it seems like performing in front of people was still a big challenge for him. He was pretty shy about singing for others.
Yeah, and that shyness keeps popping up in these early stories.
Right.
Wikipedia says that by 6th grade, he was kind of like a loner. He'd bring his guitar to school, but he'd get teased for playing what they called back then hillbilly music.
Yeah, and I think this is where like the whole environment he grew up in becomes super important.
Right,
His family lived in a largely African-American neighborhood,
right.
and he was a big fan of Mississippi Slim's radio show, that local program in Tupelo, and he actually even got some guitar lessons from Slim.
Wow.
And by the time he was 12, he'd actually gotten over that stage fright enough to perform on Slim's show, not just once, but twice.
Oh, wow, that's pretty impressive.
It is, right?
Yeah.
Big step.
Yeah, and that whole musical journey continued when the family moved to Memphis, right? He'd practice guitar with this neighbor, Lee Benson. And they even formed like this loose kind of jam session thing with the Burnett brothers, who also like went on to become big names in rockabilly.
Right.
He had all kinds of jobs to help out. He was an usher at Lowe's State Theater.
Oh, wow.
And get this, he even worked as a shabbosoi for his Jewish neighbors.
Interesting.
Doing tasks on the Sabbath that Jewish people can't do.
Right.
It's like another layer of all these different experiences he was having.
Yeah, it's fascinating how all these seemingly random things probably fed into his musical growth. He's
Yeah.
soaking up sounds and rhythms from the radio, from his community, from these little get-togethers.
Right.
And even those jobs exposed him to different parts of Memphis.
Yeah.
Different parts of the culture.
Exactly. And then when he gets to junior year of high school, you start to see those like visual elements that would become so iconic.
Oh, right.
He starts growing those sideburns and styling his hair.
Yeah.
And it's clear he's getting ideas from the looks he's seeing down on Beale Street. You know, that heart of Memphis blues and like a real melting pot of American music.
Exactly. That visual transformation wasn't just happening randomly.
Yeah,
It was tied to how he was changing musically.
totally.
He was drawn to the energy and style of Beale Street, and it started to come out in his own look.
Right. And then according to Wikipedia, there's this real turning point at Hume's High's annual minstrel show. This is April 1953.
Okay.
And here's a weird thing. He'd actually failed music earlier in school.
Really?
Only subject he ever flunked, by the way. But on that stage, he performs Till I Waltz Again with You.
Oh, yeah.
And it makes him way more popular in school.
It's so interesting, that contrast, right? Someone who didn't do well in formal music class finds success and recognition through performing.
Yeah.
Makes you think maybe that formal structure just didn't fit his natural talent and his way of making music.
Yeah, and his musical tastes were expanding like crazy, right? He's listening to those regional radio stations like WDIA,
Right.
which played what they called back then race records, spirituals, blues, rhythm and blues.
Yeah.
He's actively searching out and listening to sounds that were outside the mainstream white culture at the time, you know, just absorbing all those influences.
It's possible, like some of his peers, that he even went to blues clubs on the nights they were meant for white audiences,
Oh, wow.
highlighting that segregation in the South
Right.
and his determination to hear this music live.
Wow.
He was really inspired by local African-American musicians like Arthur Crudup, Rufus Thomas, and even B.B. King remembers knowing Presley from those early days on Beale Street.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So by the time he graduates high school, June 1953, it sounds like Elvis is pretty set on a music career.
Right.
And this is where his first serious girlfriend, Dixie Lock, comes in.
Right.
That Reddit post we talked about says their relationship went from early 1953 to October 1955.
Okay.
And the review of Dixie's book says they met at the First Assembly of God Church in Memphis and started dating in January 1954.
Okay.
Dixie was 15. Elvis was 19, working as a truck driver for Crown Electric. Joel Francis in his music review backs this up, too.
Yeah, and the book review also points out that Dixie was actually the one who started their first conversation
Oh, really?
at the Rainbow Roller Skating Rink.
Wow. So maybe even at 19, Elvis was still kind of shy.
Maybe so. Elvis.
Mm.
The musical even shows this meeting.
Yeah.
Elvis isn't so good on skates, and Dixie playfully helps him out.
Oh, that's kind of cute.
Right. It paints this nice picture of a young Elvis holding these big musical dreams, but still dealing with those typical teenage things.
Right.
First dates, awkward moments.
Totally.
Dixie taking that first step really adds a human touch.
Yeah, and the Daily Express article quotes Dixie remembering Elvis feeling like his singing talent was a gift from God.
Oh, wow.
Like he was destined to do something big with it.
Powerful stuff.
It really speaks to that inner belief he had, even if he wasn't always the most outwardly confident performer at that point.
And Joel Francis's review kind of echoes this too. He says, Dixie described Elvis as having this quiet confidence in his music, but being a bit hesitant to actually start playing.
Oh,
He apparently always had his guitar with him,
right.
but would only really play if someone asked him to.
Wow. And Elvis, the musical has this really touching scene.
Oh, yeah.
It shows a young Elvis being super upset because some other boys cut his guitar strings before a talent show. But he gets encouraged and then bravely performs Blue Moon.
Wow.
It's a great example of that passion overcoming his nerves and shyness.
Yeah, that's a really strong scene. It shows his vulnerability, but also that growing strength inside.
Yeah.
The fact that he performs even after that setback shows just how much music meant to him, even then.
Totally. And it seems like his relationship with Dixie was pretty intense during that time.
Oh, yeah?
The musical suggests they were pretty much inseparable, spending almost every day together,
Right.
going everywhere as a couple.
And Dixie's book that was published in 2021 really digs into that connection. It's got her personal memories and even some rare photos from their time together.
Wow.
The review mentions photos with the Blackwood brothers and from his Sunday school class.
Right.
It gives you this closer look at his life outside of the music.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting that Priscilla Presley actually wrote the foreword to Dixie's book?
Oh, wow.
The review mentions it. Priscilla says that Elvis would tell her stories about Dixie when he was stationed in Germany.
Really?
And they actually became good friends later on.
Wow, that says a lot about how important that first relationship was.
It does, right? It suggests a real, genuine affection and respect that Elvis kept for Dixie, even as his life took this crazy turn.
Yeah, the fact that he shared those early memories with Priscilla is pretty significant.
Totally. But of course, as Elvis's music career started to take off, it put a strain on their relationship.
Right.
Joel Francis's review says they did try to stay together after he started performing more. But his schedule got so busy, they just drifted apart.
And LV Ice,
Hmm.
the musical, has that telegram scene, where Elvis is all excited, telling Dixie his record is doing well,
Right.
and telling her to come home.
Yeah.
It really captures that time of rapid change and the excitement building around his early success.
Totally. It kind of hints at those different paths their lives were starting to take.
Yeah, and Dixie's book mentions that she started dating Bobby Emmons during her senior year of high school,
Oh, okay.
and they ended up getting married.
Right. So life went on for both of them as Elvis's star was rising.
It shows how even important early relationships can change as people grow and their lives go in different directions.
Exactly. And this brings us to the start of his really groundbreaking music career.
Right.
Wikipedia tells us that in August 1953, before he even officially started dating, Dixie Elvis went and recorded a two-sided acetate disc at Memphis Recording Service,
Okay.
which would later become the legendary Sun Records.
Wow.
He paid for the studio time himself to record My Happiness, and That's When Your Heartaches Begin.
Wow.
And Elvis the Musical also shows this super important recording session.
What's so interesting is that note from the receptionist, Marian Keisker.
Yeah.
She just wrote, "Good ballad singer Holt."
Right.
Like that simple, almost throwaway comment captured that first impression
Yeah.
and the potential that someone at Sun Records saw in him,
Yeah.
even before Sam Phillips himself heard it.
Right. And then he went back and recorded another acetate in January 1954, but things didn't roll up right away.
Right.
Wikipedia says he got turned down by a local vocal quartet
Oh, wow.
and even by Eddie Bond, who told him to stick to truck driving.
Really?
That's a pretty big early rejection.
It is, but it's also a classic example of how the music industry can be so unpredictable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how even huge stars face setbacks early on.
Right.
It really shows his determination.
Yeah.
He didn't let those rejections stop him.
Totally. And then his career really takes off in 1954 at Sun Records with Sam Phillips, who, as Wikipedia points out, was looking for a white artist who could capture the feeling of African-American music
Right.
and bring it to a wider audience.
Yeah.
This shared vision was huge in the Elvis story.
Oh, absolutely. And the result was rockabilly, that fusion of country and rhythm and blues.
Yeah.
With Elvis on rhythm acoustic guitar, Scotty Moore on lead guitar, and Bill Black laying down that bass line.
Yeah, and their first public performance as this groundbreaking trio was July 17, 1954 at the Bon Air Club.
Okay.
And then just a few weeks later, something really iconic happens at the Overton Park Shell.
Oh, yeah.
This is where Elvis first does his rubber legs dance.
Right.
Wikipedia says it was a mix of him feeling the rhythm of the music and being nervous performing in front of a big crowd.
Yeah.
His legs would shake in a way that just captivated the young women in the audience.
Right. And Elvis, the musical really highlights this early stage presence, too.
Totally. It's crazy to think that this signature move that became so Elvis came about almost by accident from that mix of musicality and nerve.
Scotty Moore even talked about how the crowd would go wild during the instrumental breaks when Elvis would start moving like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And pretty soon after that, Moore and Black decide to leave their old band and play with Elvis full time.
Right.
And Bob Neal becomes their manager.
Okay.
They're playing all the time at the Eagles Nest Club, but it's not all smooth sailing.
Right.
Wikipedia reminds us that Elvis only appeared on the Grand Ole Opry once.
Really?
October 10, 1954.
Okay.
And afterwards, he was politely told that his style wasn't really right for their show.
Oh, wow.
And Elvis, the musical, shows this pretty significant rejection, too.
The Opry rejection is a big moment.
I figured.
It really shows how the established country music world wasn't ready for what Elvis represented.
Right.
He was blending genres in a way that didn't fit their mold.
Totally. But then just a month later, November 1954, he plays at Louisiana Hayride,
Okay.
which was like the Opry's more rebellious rival.
Right.
And he gets a way more enthusiastic response there.
Oh, good.
And drummer DJ Fontana joins the group, adding that percussive drive to their sound.
Fontana's arrival was key.
Yeah.
He brought that accented beat, from his time playing in strip clubs,
Wow.
which fit perfectly with Elvis's dynamic moves and the overall energy of their shows.
Totally.
The Hayride saw his potential, and signed him to a year-long contract for those Saturday night shows.
Wow, that's a real commitment.
It was a big deal.
Yeah, and he even records a radio commercial for Southern-made donuts in exchange for a box of glazed donuts.
Really?
Hilariously, the commercial was never released.
Oh, wow.
And he makes his first TV appearance on the KSLA TV broadcast of Louisiana Hayride.
Okay.
But around the same time, he bombs an audition for Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so those early TV appearances, even with that Godfrey setback, were really important in getting him seen beyond those regional radio shows and live gigs.
Yeah, for sure.
And by early 1955, his hayride shows and his records have made him a regional star.
Right.
His influence is spreading across Tennessee and into West Texas.
And then this guy, Colonel Tom Parker, enters the scene, someone who would become totally intertwined with Elvis's career.
Right. Bob Neal, Elvis's manager at the time, recognized Parker as this top-notch promoter and brought him in.
Parker's arrival was a real turning point.
Yeah.
He had this vision for national, even global stardom
Right.
that maybe Neal, with his regional focus, couldn't quite see.
And it's interesting that Roy Orbison saw Elvis perform in February 1955 and was totally blown away by his energy and style. He said there was just no reference point in the culture to compare it to.
Wow.
Which really shows how groundbreaking Elvis was.
It does. Even other musicians, established artists.
Right.
They were stunned by his stage presence and the originality of his sound.
And by August 1955, Sun Records had released 10 songs credited to Elvis Presley, Scotty and Bill, some with Fontana on drums.
Okay.
But this mix of R&B and country, this new sound that would become known as rockabilly, it struggled to get radio play at first.
Really?
Wikipedia says that country stations thought he sounded too black, while R&B stations thought he was too hillbilly.
Wow, this really highlights those racial barriers and the strict genre rules that Elvis was challenging and breaking down.
Right.
His music didn't fit into those boxes.
Right.
Which caused resistance at first, but ultimately opened up a whole new musical world.
Totally. And Sam Phillips in Elvis, the musical, is portrayed as really believing in this fusion.
Yeah.
He saw it as the heart of American music, going beyond those color lines.
Right.
And even though radio was hesitant, Elvis's performances were creating a real buzz.
Right.
His rubber legs and his whole stage presence were getting these huge reactions, especially from the young women in the audience.
Yeah, Elvis Oz. The musical's stage directions even describe the audience going wild at shows like the Opry.
Wow.
And teenage boys sometimes reacted with hostility, maybe out of jealousy at all the attention he was getting.
That's so interesting, that visceral reaction, especially from the younger generation. It was a sign of the cultural shift Elvis was starting. It wasn't just the music. It was the energy, the rebelliousness, that raw emotion he put out there.
Exactly. And then comes this huge turning point.
Yeah.
At the Country Disc Jockey Convention in November 1955.
Okay.
Elvis is voted the year's most promising male artist.
Wow.
And soon after that, RCA Victor buys Elvis's Sun Records contract for a whopping $40,000.
Wow.
LVS. The musical shows Colonel Parker making this deal with Sam Phillips, and it really emphasizes how big a moment this was.
$40,000 was an insane amount of money back then.
It was.
It shows how much interest there was from the big labels and how smart Parker was at negotiating.
Colonel Tom Parker, as they show him in the musical.
Right.
He saw that Sun Records, as great as it was, couldn't give Elvis the national stage he needed.
Yeah.
And he thought RCA could give him that crucial TV exposure.
And because Elvis was still legally a minor at 20, his dad, Vernon, actually had to sign the RCA contract.
Wow.
And Parker, always the businessman,
Yeah.
he sets up Elvis Presley music and Gladys music to handle his new material, which meant songwriters had to give up a third of their royalties.
Yeah, that was a controversial but successful move by Parker.
Right.
To get control of Elvis's publishing rights.
And as soon as the deal is done, RCA starts this massive campaign to promote Elvis.
Wow.
And they re-release his Sun recordings,
Okay.
setting the stage for his national and then international breakthrough.
And going back to those early days at Sun Elvis,
Yeah.
the musical gives us a peek into that creative process.
Yeah.
It shows Elvis, Scotty, and Bill struggling in those early recording sessions
Right.
until they just burst into, "That's all right."
Right.
And Sam Phillips immediately knows it's something revolutionary, something totally new.
Yeah. Whether it happened exactly like that or not, it captures that spirit of innovation.
Right.
And that almost accidental discovery of a sound that would change popular music.
Sam Phillips's ear for something fresh and different was so important.
Totally. And the musical also touches on those early struggles to get Elvis's music on the radio.
Yeah.
DJs were hesitant. They didn't know if it fit into country or R&B.
Right. But even with that resistance from the industry, teenagers started calling radio stations like crazy, requesting his songs.
Yeah.
Which shows the power of that grassroots enthusiasm.
Yeah, that groundswell of support from young listeners blew past those radio barriers.
Right.
And pushed his music into the mainstream.
It was the audience that really embraced this new sound.
Exactly.
Even when the industry wasn't sure.
And we can't forget that appearance on the Grand Ole Opry,
Right.
LV. The musical shows that polite but unenthusiastic response,
Yeah.
The manager saying he wasn't quite right for their program.
Right.
So different from those wild crowds at the Louisiana Hayride.
Yeah, and there's even this fictional scene backstage with Bill Monroe.
Oh, yeah.
Who seems to criticize Elvis's rockabilly version of Blue Moon of Kentucky.
Right.
But then surprisingly says he actually liked it.
That made-up scene, even though it didn't really happen,
Right.
speaks to the tension and then the acceptance, even if it was sometimes reluctant.
Of this new musical form in the established country music world.
Totally.
It highlights that push and pull between tradition and something new.
Yeah, and those early energetic shows with the leg shaking, like the musical shows,
Yeah.
were definitely causing a stir, especially among the young women in the audience.
Right. Colonel Tom Parker, always watching the audience.
Right.
Saw this firsthand and immediately knew Elvis had huge potential.
Yeah.
He went up to Dixie Lock after that Opry performance.
It's amazing to look back and see how quickly and dramatically Elvis's life changed.
Right.
He went from this shy guy driving a truck to a rising star in such a short time.
It's incredible.
And his relationship with Dixie Lock must have been so important during those early years.
Yeah.
Offering stability and personal connection while everything else was changing so fast.
Absolutely. We see this amazing mix of influences, the gospel music from his childhood, the blues and R&B he absorbed from his surroundings,
Right.
and the country sounds that were all around him in the South.
And the support from people like Sam Phillips, who took a chance on recording his unique sound.
Yeah, so crucial.
And then Colonel Tom Parker arrives,
Right.
a controversial figure later on.
Yeah.
But definitely key in getting that record deal and pushing for the national exposure that made Elvis a superstar.
Right. And we can't forget how important his music was in breaking down those racial barriers in the music industry.
Totally. This deep dive into Elvis's early life really shows us all those forces that came together to create this icon.
Right.
And when you think about those early experiences, those key relationships, those big moments,
Yeah.
it makes you wonder how Elvis's life and music might have turned out differently without those specific things,
I know, it's fascinating.
What can we really learn about how cultural icons are made from those early chapters of his story?
Yeah.
It's been a really fascinating journey through all these sources.
It has.
And we hope you, our listener, have gotten some good insights into the birth of the king.
Yeah, thanks for diving deep with us.
Thanks for listening.
See ya.